Okay, there are a lot of hard things in the news today. I am struggling a little bit, and I know I'm making a lot of long videos to cover as much of that as I can, but there is something uplifting that I would like to talk about. There is some good news, and it relates to a subject that I have spoken about frequently, and so I was really excited when this came out today. So this is an article from wagingnonviolence.org. The article is called "Resistance is Alive and Well in the United States." I got to put my glasses on for once because my computer is far enough away that I actually need them to read. So this article is by Dr. Erica Chenoweth, Jeremy Pressman, and Soha Hammam. It came out today. And I am a big fan of Dr. Erica Chenoweth's work. They study nonviolent resistance as a means to topple authoritarianism and restore democracy, or implement it for the first time. They are the originator of the 3.5% rule, which is a descriptive, not proscriptive rule, studying past movements and trying to assess where the threshold is, where there is enough participation for long enough for nonviolent resistance to be successful in toppling authoritarianism. I made a video a couple days ago that's called something like, "This is the plan to save ourselves," or "This is how we save us." Just a few videos ago. If you're watching this on YouTube, I will put the link up here so you can click to watch it. So if you want to understand what it really looks like to have an organized resistance and have enough of the population participate that we can be successful, watch that video, read Dr. Erica Chenoweth's research. If we want to understand what is required of us to be successful in restoring our democracy, it's important that, well, one, I would say go watch that video, but two, read the work of Dr. Erica Chenoweth and then look to examples in history of when these kinds of movements have been successful and what they have needed to do. What are the steps that they've had to take? How many people have they needed to participate? And what is the duration that is going to be required of participation? And I made a video on my backup yesterday or the day before where I was trying to talk to Canadians to say, like, we understand the economic boycotts and we understand that you want to pull American products off your shelves. Like, please keep up the economic pressure. We don't resent you for that. Please understand that the American people are your allies in the fight against fascism. And we see your efforts as something you are doing ultimately to help democracy, and we're not angry with you. And I got a lot of angry Canadians in my comments who just kind of wanted to use me as a punching bag. That's okay. I understand that they're angry. Trump wants to do horrible things to their country. And I understand their fear is very, very real. But something that I got over and over and over again was like, y'all aren't even doing anything. Y'all aren't even protesting. Americans aren't doing anything. Americans are just staying home. Where are the protests? Where are the protests? Like, lots of comments like this. And that's one of the reasons that I want to draw attention to this article that came out today. It says, protests of Trump may not look like the mass marches of 2017, but research shows that they are far more numerous and frequent, while also shifting toward more powerful forms of resistance. My replies to the Canadians in my comments were like, y'all, we are out in the streets. There are marches happening literally every day. People are doing something every day of the week all around the country. It's not being reported. It's not being covered in the news. You have not heard about it. There were large veterans protests on March 14th. I didn't hear anything about it in the news. I had to go to Instagram Reels to find anything out about how those went. There's active suppression of the resistance that Americans are engaging in the media, both so that people abroad think that we are just accepting what is happening, but also so that we here at home give up and feel like nobody is doing anything. Okay, let me read a little bit from this article. Where is the resistance is a common refrain. Our research shows that the resistance is alive and well. Many underestimate resistance to the current Republican administration regime because they view resistance through a narrow lens. The 2017 Women's March in particular, immediate in its response, massive in its scope and size, may inform collective imaginations about what the beginning of a resistance movement should look like during Trump 2.0. In fact, our research shows that street protests today are far more numerous and frequent than skeptics might suggest. Although it is true that the reconfigured People's March of 2025, held on January 18, saw lower turnout than the 2017 Women's March, that date also saw the most protests in a single day for over a year. And since January 22nd, we've seen more than twice as many street protests than took place during the same period 8 years ago. Here's Chenoweth's graph from the article. February 2025 alone, we have already tallied over 2,085 protests, which included major protests in support of federal workers, LGBTQ rights, immigrant rights, Palestinian self-determination, Ukraine, and demonstrations against Tesla and Trump's agenda more generally. This is compared with only 937 protests during February of 2017, which included major protests against the so-called Muslim ban, as well as other pro-immigrant and pro-choice protests. Coordinated days of protest include the March 4th protest for democracy, the Stand Up for Science March on March 7th, rallies in recognition of International Women's Day on March 8th, and protests demanding the release of Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil. This suggests little likelihood of these actions slowing down. These are all occurring in the background of a tidal wave of lawsuits challenging the Trump regime. Sorry, I editorialized. They said administration, I said regime. Historically, street protests and legal challenges are common avenues for popular opposition to governments, but economic non-cooperation, such as strikes, boycotts, and boycotts, is often what gets the goods. Individual participation is deliberately obscure, and targeted companies may have little interest in releasing internal data. Only the aggregate impacts are measurable, and as is the case for Tesla, Target, and other companies, those impacts so far have been measurable indeed. Target is in deep trouble. Tesla is in deep trouble. Elon Musk has lost like half his wealth in just a few weeks. Consider the protests against Tesla in response to Elon Musk firing federal workers and blocking federal funding. The multifaceted campaign has a quite specific goal: to punish Tesla, Musk's signature company. This is really important. One of my mutuals, CJ Trowbridge, I want to talk more about that in another video, but they said that if your protest does not have a demand, if it does not have a focused goal, that it's a waste of your time and energy. And I completely agree. And one of the reasons that the Tesla campaign has been so effective is that no matter how people have been carrying it out, there's one purpose: punish Tesla, make Tesla go bankrupt, and therefore make Musk go bankrupt, right? In addition to protests at Tesla showrooms and charging stations, people have sold their Teslas. Others have called on mutual funds to divest from Tesla stock. I actually did this. My IRA, I have one of the ethical IRAs, green IRAs, that's supposed to be more friendly. And unfortunately, as an electric car company, Tesla is part of basically any environmentally friendly retirement fund. And so call your fund manager and demand that they divest. The stock price has dropped significantly in the last month for Tesla, perhaps in part due to Musk's Doge work and how enraged the people are, how he has poisoned his own brand. This shift toward non-cooperation over large-scale protests may be strategically wise. In 2017, many who attended the women's marches remained deeply engaged in civic activity, funneling into groups and coalitions like Indivisible, Swing Left, Run for Something, Fight Back Table, and the like. People who aligned with Indivisible and groups like it were almost certainly responsible for saving the Affordable Care Act in 2017. That's true. Largely through pressure on their elected members of Congress. The MAGA faction had not yet consolidated control of the GOP, and within a year, the blue wave flipped the House during the 2018 midterms. Under such conditions, protests and political pressures made a lot of sense. Those groups and others still remain active, but today's political terrain may call for a more muscular movement strategy. Okay. The MAGA faction controls the GOP and enforces strict discipline amongst its members through fear and a threat of a well-funded Republican primary opponent in the next election. The Supreme Court majority is solidly to the right. Elected GOP officials are abandoning town halls and discouraging constituents from calling their offices. A lot of them they keep their voicemail full so that you can't call and leave a message. Street protests endure but are increasingly surveilled and high risk, as the detention of Mahmoud Khalil suggests. Uncertainty about whether the Trump administration will ignore the First Amendment and weaponize the government to persecute political opponents looms large. Yes, it does. Okay, I'm going to have to break this into two videos because TikTok only allows me 10 minutes per video. But this is sort of breaking into the second half of Chenoweth's evolving argument about resistance, and so I want to talk about it in part two, but let me leave off with this bit here. In the face of such changes, the public's most powerful options are often withholding labor power and purchasing power. Calling in sick from work or school, refusing to buy, and stay-at-home demonstrations are notoriously difficult to police. That is very true. Last month, an inestimable number of people participated in such actions to highlight a day without immigrants. The prominence of billionaires in the administration and populist anger toward them make this type of approach even more viable in today's climate. Okay, please come back for part two because I want to go through the rest of this article. I don't know about you, but so far I'm feeling pretty encouraged by this and I want to get to the next part, so hang tight with me. Okay, I am losing the light and I have to get to my Indivisible meeting soon, but this is part two, covering Dr. Erica Chenoweth's new article that is out in wagingnonviolence.org today. It's called Resistance is Alive and Well in the United States, and it talks about what the protests have looked like so far during this regime, how they have been far more numerous than during Trump 1.0, and also how effective resistance is evolving, and we are seeing the people implement new and innovative and perhaps more effective strategies. Dr. Chenoweth calls it a more muscular strategy. So please go back and watch the first half if you want to see kind of how marches and things have played out over the last 2 months and how they compare to 2017. But now let's talk about some of these other strategies. We're looking at a regime that is wanting to ignore the First Amendment, weaponize the government. We have a highly militarized police force, and protesting in person may become more, fraught. And we are also looking at the fact that street protests are more highly surveilled and high risk in general. People are employing other strategies. So Chenoweth says, in the face of these changes, the public's most powerful options are often withholding labor and purchasing power. I have said since November that if all of America's teachers walked off the job for a week, if they all walked off in protest, that this coup would be over. That if all of our labor unions got together and they walked off the job, this would be over very, very quickly. But then I get a whole list of excuses about why that can't be done. A lot of unions are prohibited from striking. A lot of people are afraid that they will get fired. There's not good strike funds for them, et cetera, et cetera. The power of our unions is really weakened. And the reality is a lot of union people, they voted for Trump, and they may not yet be feeling the pinch hard enough from his reprehensible, damaging policies to want to do that. But I have argued that from day one. As the spouse of a teacher who would fully support our public schools and our teachers if they were to walk off the job, I think that would be a brilliant thing for them to do. It would get the job done. Okay, so Chenoweth goes on to say, calling in sick from work or school, refusing to buy, and stay-at-home demonstrations are notoriously difficult to police. And then they say the prominence of billionaires in the administration and populist anger toward them, and that is growing by the day, may make this type of approach more viable in today's climate. Indeed, the diversification of resistance methods puts the United States on a similar trajectory to many democracy movements of the past. It's like we say in permaculture that you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. I've talked a lot about how in permaculture we are big fans of small solutions, how all of those little diverse strategies can add up and have a massive cumulative impact. And that is exactly what Dr. Chenoweth is saying here. It's the same reason that I don't just grow apples. I grow apples and pears and plums and aronia berries and June berries and blueberries and quince and persimmons and pawpaws. And I could go on because I'm diversifying and therefore spreading out the risk and increasing the odds of like any one of those crops is going to have a good year. And if one of my crops fails, I can fall back on all the others. If we diversify our resistance methods, we are not putting all our eggs in one basket. And if one of those methods is not as successful against this regime, we are trying all kinds of different things. Dr. Chenoweth goes on to say, in anti-authoritarian movements of the 20th century, economic non-cooperation, more so than protest alone, was the coordinated activity that split elites and made way for democratic breakthroughs. In apartheid South Africa, it was the enormous economic pressure through boycotts of white-owned businesses, general strikes, divestments, and capital flight that brought the white supremacist National Party to heel and elevated reformers who were willing to do business with Nelson Mandela and the ANC. In communist Poland, it was the ability of trade unionists to credibly call for general strikes and credibly call off such strikes that gave the Solidarity movement the leverage to negotiate a peaceful democratic transition. Remember what I just said about unions and how effective strikes from unions could be and how quickly they could get the job done? Gandhi's non-cooperation campaigns in India made the colony ungovernable by British colonial authorities. When the Nazis invaded and occupied Denmark in the 1940s, non-cooperation was near total. No one remembered how to run the railroad. Teachers had to leave school early to tend to their gardens. Factory workers slowed down or stopped production altogether. Danes obscured the identities of their Jewish neighbors, gave them temporary haven, and secured their passage through fishing boats to neutral territory, saving thousands of lives. A few weeks ago, I was talking about the importance of learning what work to rule is, but not only that, gumming up the works by non-compliance, by malicious compliance, by slow rolling everything that you do, by asking for clarification in a bunch of different emails, playing stupid a little bit at work, asking for extra forms, extra signatures, anything that can slow down and gum up the works, especially for federal workers. And for people who work for the technocrats as well. Similarly, in Czechoslovakia, 6 days after the Soviet invasion of 1968, the newspaper Večerní Praha published 10 commandments, writing, when a Soviet soldier comes to you, you 1. Don't know, don't care, don't tell, don't have, don't know how to, don't give cash, can't do, don't sell, don't show, do nothing. The oppositional habits of thinking and practice, nurtured over 2 decades through underground popular schools, art, literature, and outlawed news sources, ultimately paved the way for the Velvet Revolution. Non-compliance with fascists is key, and we have an opportunity to be creative about how we do that. Indeed, the United States has its own storied history of resisting authoritarianism through non-cooperation. Pro-independence colonists living under the British Crown organized campaigns to refuse to buy or consume British goods, refused to abide by laws requiring colonists to export raw materials to Britain, refused to serve on juries under Crown-appointed judges, and develop alternative institutions, including the Continental Congress itself. The Boston Tea Party was a defiant act of non-cooperation, a refusal to import, consume, or pay taxes on the Crown's tea. In fact, in 1815, John Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson of his hope that historians would recall those acts of non-cooperation, the Tea Party itself, and not the War of Independence, as the revolution. That is what it was in the minds of the people. It was the acts of non-cooperation. That was the revolution. And I know we live in a country where people are very much indoctrinated from a young age to obey authority unquestioningly. And we've got to have a shift in our mindset, away from obedience, away from compliance, away from immediately taking what an authority figure says as law, and instead think about being creative in our non-compliance. Think about how we can push back. Think of every opportunity where they want us to comply as an opportunity to resist. Much later, during the Civil Rights Campaign, desegregation was first tangibly achieved in large part through non-cooperation campaigns, like the courageous school attendance of the Little Rock Nine, the Montgomery bus boycotts, the lunch counter sit-ins and boycotts of businesses in Nashville and elsewhere, strikes amongst sanitation workers in Memphis, and other acts of refusal to abide by the Jim Crow system of racial segregation. These took place in combination with marches and demonstrations that were powerful and dramatic displays of the moral power of the movement, as well as legal action that demanded the government abide by its own constitution. That Americans seem to be rediscovering art, science, and the potency of non-cooperation, along with a robust protest capacity and legal action, shows that resistance against Trump's agenda in America is not only alive and well, it is savvy, diversifying, and probably just getting started. And with that, I've got to get going to my local Indivisible meeting, because we are going to come up with some creative, strategic, artistic, scientific, potent ways to be non-cooperative and to work on recovering our democracy. I know that the news today is hard. There is a lot of scary stuff going on. Please do not be overwhelmed by it. Please let it prompt you to act. Let it prompt you to get coordinated, to figure out how you can be part of the movement, how you can be part of this opportunity to reclaim our democracy, protect our freedoms, protect our children and their future. Okay, I gotta go, y'all. Do what you need to do to protect your peace, but get ready and get to work.